So here we are in the main Cubase workspace, but before we look at any of the details here, you need to set up this project. This applies to any DAW. You need to set bit depth and sample rate and frame rates and things like that before you start editing, mixing, importing, or recording any file. So you need to head over to the project menu, and right at the bottom there, project setup is what we want. You'll notice the shortcut is Shift S. I am working on a Mac here, so shortcuts will be stuff like Command S for save. The same applies for PC, it's Control S. And you can also have dedicated key commands and also set it up to be what you're used to, like use Pro Tools shortcuts instead. So this is our project setup menu. Pretty simple stuff, mostly self-explanatory. You can enter names and company name and stuff, but what we're after is our sample rate and bit depth. You see I've got those typical video standards here, 48 kilohertz, 24-bit bit depth. And that is fine for what we want to do today. If you are using a 32-bit floating point workflow, like a project recorded on our Zoom F6, this is where you want to choose 32-bit floating point to make use of the benefits of that bit depth. But I'm going to leave it on 24 bits for today. Now, you can also set a few other things. This you can also change later, but bars and beats, that is very much a music production thing, and for video or audio post-production, it's much more useful to have seconds or even better, time code as a display format for your ruler, for your video display. So I'm going to set that to time code over here. If you're on a video project, this is where you can also choose your frames per second or your frame rate. And if you've already imported a video, you can click on Get Frame Rate per Video. I'll show you what it looks like in a later video. If you've mismatched that, I'm going to leave this one on 30 frames per second. Now, you do have a project duration. It defaults to 10 minutes over here. It's not that crucial that you set it, because the moment you record for longer than 10 minutes or import a longer file, it's just going to lengthen your project timeline. But I do like to set this correctly. If I work on a 30-second promo, I have a project that's 30 or 45 seconds long, because when I zoom all the way out, it doesn't give me the entire world. It just gives me kind of my project length there. So for a 24-minute TV episode, I will have a project duration that is slightly above that, mostly for zooming's sake. But you can always set this again, and you'll see it will increase depending on how long you record or what you import. Now, if you're a third-year student watching this, we've discussed pan laws, hopefully in great detail. And you'll notice that you actually have a few options here in Cubase in terms of how much it decreases that mono signal panned to the middle. Now, the default of equal power will suit most of your needs there. So I will leave that as is, and now is not the time to get into pan laws. I'm going to leave the rest as is. You'll notice when we do the new window video, there's a few more options here, but most of it looks exactly the same. So that's our project setup, and I'm going to hit OK. Now, part of this introduction video, you won't have to do this per project, but I want to show you a few basic preferences that you might want to change. Now, the difference between project setup and preferences is that the preferences is broad or general for this computer instance of Cubase, where the project setup, that's for each project. Now, standard shortcut on a Mac is Command comma, but you can also find it in the Cubase menu, and there you find some preferences. Now, a lot of things can be set in this menu, as you can see. I'm not going to go into great detail here because the defaults are actually pretty good, but you'll see we're under general here. Now, the first thing is that's where you can switch on or off the Steinberg hub, and I prefer it off. So I'm going to switch this off. And also our autosave interval is default to 15 minutes here. Now, Cubase is generally quite stable, but once you start putting together quite a complicated system with external plugins and round trips to Isotope RX and stuff like that, there's also a potential for a software to stall or crash. And then it really helps if you can go back to your last autosave if you're not one of those compulsive savers. So I will recommend that you set this quite a little bit slower. Now, if you double click, I'm going to set my autosave interval to 5 minutes. It saves very quickly, so it won't really affect your workflow. And your maximum 10 backup files, I've never had the need to go back many different versions, so you can even set this down, but the files are tiny, so it's not really a big deal to have a lot of backup files here. I would also not change anything else on this particular menu. In terms of other preferences to change at this point, I would not recommend any further changes at this point. So I'm going to apply this and say OK.